the professors who benefit from this well-furnished career pipeline, often I would say that one professor in this kind of field is too many. In my research, I found that these large backdoor hiring programs that are run by places like the UC system, the people that they're hiring, not only are they the people who are out there celebrating when Hamas massacred Israeli citizens, it's also people who are doing things like transgender studies. Some people who are actually, they say that their area of specialization is pornography studies, fat studies. And so, yeah, I think there are absolutely too many people who are being encouraged to pursue this career path.
I'm really excited about our guest today, John Saylor of the Manhattan Institute. Why? Because he looks at academic freedom. He looks at activism in academia in his work at the Manhattan Institute. Let me get specific in a second. First, let me ask you to please hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, YouTube. Just hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. It's totally free to subscribe, by the way. And then the podcast will just drop right into your lap. So John Saylor is the director of higher education policy and a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. His research and investigations cover issues of academic freedom, free speech, and here's the key one, ideological capture in higher education. Interestingly, he also studied at Columbia University, where all of this is a very big issue right now. We're going to talk to him. How do these institutions of higher learning get captured by ideology? Who better to tell us than John Saylor? He is next. John Saylor, it's good to see you. You've been writing a lot these days about, I guess we would call it the ideological capture of higher institutions of learning. And you actually studied at Columbia. So your whole background fascinates me in terms of the lens through which you're looking at this. How do you start when you start looking at this? Because it seems to me this is such a widespread thing and it would be tough to kind of drill down. How do you start?
I think I've always been motivated by this question. Really, why are universities the way that they are? Because a lot of people look at the universities today and they see, for one, over the last 2 years, they've seen chaos. But you look at the polling on people's perceptions, Americans' perception of higher education, and what you'll see is that 10 years ago in 2015, only about 10% of people said they had little or no trust in higher education. That number has rocketed up to 30%.
Wow.
And usually there are pretty easy ways to kind of suss out why that is. We have student activists who see their job as not only transforming the university, but changing the world through activism. We have, and increasingly there's this perception that professors are not really doing what we think of when we think of the calling of scholarship and science, rather than engaging in sort of the truth-seeking process. What we're finding is that a lot of professors view their scholarship as an extension of a political agenda. And there are a lot of, I think, explanations for this. But I think starting with that question has been helpful for me, because one issue that I've run into is that for a lot of people, the story is basically this. University professors are traditionally, historically more progressive than the rest of the country. And over time, they've kind of hired more professors who are also progressive, and they only interact with one another. They have a peer review system, which makes them very responsive to the opinions of other people in their fields. And over time, we've gradually gone from tenured radicals to tenured super radicals. So it's a natural progression. And I think what a lot of my research has shown is that that's not really true. there are structural features involved in getting us to the place that we've come to today.
The place that we've come to today is, I think you've described it well. I mean, you see university professors. We saw it after October 7th. I think that's really where people went, wait a minute, what's going on? When these professors came out and celebrated this stuff and got on their bullhorns and said, it's about time, or this is about, celebrated this violence, this disgusting attack. And you thought, wait a minute, what is with these people? So I often wonder about, you talked about systemic, the funding of these universities. Now, we can look at Harvard and their $53 billion endowment or whatever, and we can look at federal funding, but we've come to learn China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they fund a lot of what goes on these universities. That has to, I would think, how much does that matter?
Well, the question of foreign funding is one that's a bit mystifying, because often what you see with foreign funding is a lot of the universities that have substantial foreign funding, what they are also doing is building these sort of bigger relationships with other countries where they put a branch campus in that country, and that's very much to the benefit of the university. It's also to the benefit often of these countries that are sort of buying the prestige of an American university. And so in a situation like that, what's interesting is you don't necessarily have to, there never has to be a moment where a university leader sits down with someone from that country, maybe an adversary of the United States, and says, "Hey, we want, to have a branch campus in your country, or what do we have to do to get that?" Rather, you're a university. You're always in a situation where you have to be fundraising. You have to be mindful of these high dollar gifts and these high dollar relationships, and that'll over time, I think, absolutely influence the way that universities approach certain big issues. And I'll say, we see this to some extent with funding that comes from that comes locally. So one thing that I've found over the years is that the NIH, a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but the NIH is just 100% for the medical sciences. It is the most important institution in the country. There really wouldn't be medical science in the United States as we know it without the NIH. It pours billions of dollars into universities. And this means that universities have to be very mindful of even the smallest priority that the NIH expresses. It's not like the NIH has necessarily told universities, hey, you have to embrace these Obama era equity priorities. Sometimes they give universities a nudge, but universities also know that that's a priority. The NIH has not made this priority a secret. And when I talk to medical scientists, a lot of them say, hey, the NIH is a big reason that we have a lot of this DEI programming. And some of it is made explicit, but a lot of it is implicit. When you're getting millions and millions of dollars from anyone, as a university, you have to be mindful of that donor's priorities. And that's why this issue.
I don't understand why the NIH has that as a priority. I mean, it seems to me you want to make medical discoveries, you want to advance medicine. So I know here I live in Minnesota, and at the University of Minnesota, when you're going through med school, you have to stand up and say, I realize that I am learning on a land that was stolen, and all these speeches that are meaningless unless they're, you're trying to indoctrinate people to really feel like, oh my God, I'm guilty of living on stolen land. And, nothing I do matters unless I acknowledge that I don't understand why that advances the NIH. It seems to me it has nothing to do with medical science. So why is DEI, why is this stuff valued by the NIH?
I mean, the story goes back at least to the Obama era. There was a study that was produced around 2011 that found that there was that alleged that there was bias in NIH awards. So like an NIH R01 grant, that is basically a career maker for a medical scientist. If you don't get one, then you're not really a player. If you do get one, that sets you up for a career. So this is a really important grant. And the NIH found, or the study found, that there's some sort of bias, racial bias, in the awarding of R01 grants. Now, all of this literature about racial bias, you have to take with a grain of salt, because you can even see with the outcome of this study, they're often extremely useful as a tool for advancing a particular agenda. And around 2011, 2012, the Obama administration took a much harder line approach to its agenda to kind of raise the salience of race issues. And you see this in the NIH, you see this in the National Science Foundation. And I still think it's an underreported story that these are institutions, they are so flushed with cash, they are so important to universities, that they that I would say that in large part it was the federal government that gave us DEI. And now why did they ultimately do that? There's an argument that comes from scientists that says, well, diversity is really important because when you're in a scientific research team, you need to have different perspectives. I would say in response to that different racial groups does not actually necessarily mean different perspectives. It's not necessarily the proxy that a lot of people think it is. But there is that scientific argument. But I've always taken that this sort of research-based arguments to some extent as extremely convenient covers for what has been ultimately a political agenda, and a political agenda that's been pushed by previous presidential administrations, the Obama administration, the Biden administration. It was not really stopped substantially during the first Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And when you have these funding behemoths pushing this kind of this kind of agenda, other institutions follow suit. So what you see is that a lot of private foundations also embrace this kind of priority at the same time. There could be a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is that private foundations, to some extent, rely on the ecosystem that the federal government has created. And to some extent, these are people who know each other. The people who run private foundations are often in close proximity to the people who run big federal grant-making organizations. And so, but regardless of where it came from, what we've seen over the last 15 years is a coordinated effort between federal funders, private foundations, universities, university systems, that has in practice created a kind of career pipeline and large talent pool made up of people who share this activist vision for higher education. I truly think that's how we got here, and that's the big problem facing anyone who wants to reform higher ed.
Wow. So, and that is a big problem. I as I was reading your article about this pipeline, it occurred to me that maybe a lot of people, I was reading about how you're constantly looking for funds. You've got to prove yourself worthy of the funds. Is it possible that because activism is so embraced at these colleges and universities, and it's sort of a soft landing for these people, that there are too many people in academia, and that they're just keep hiring even when they can't totally fund it, because people would rather take a career in academia where they can be activists than go out into the real world and earn an honest buck?
Yeah, ironically, it's almost that there are simultaneously too many and too few. And so on one hand, I would say it's not just that academia is an appealing career path for somebody who wants a fairly easy life, spending most of their time writing about their pet political projects. It is. Mm-hmm. But We have a lot of institutions out there. The federal government has been involved in this project, and universities are very mindful of it. Foundations are very mindful of it. The institutions that really want to put a certain type of person on the expressway to becoming a professor. So there are these enormous undergraduate programs that give undergraduates grants so that they can do a research project, so that they can have a good application to graduate school. And these are all, ostensibly focused on recruiting underrepresented minorities. In practice, what they do is typically they say, we want people who pursue a particular kind of social justice agenda. Take that model and repeat it in graduate school. There are numerous programs that fund graduate school and make graduate school very easy for people who fit that particular profile, for postdoctoral fellowships, for professorships. So on one hand, there's this talent pipeline basically being boosted, and I think there are absolutely way too many people who fit into that category. And I would say, in the writing that I've done, the professors who benefit from this well-furnished career pipeline, often I would say that one professor in this kind of field is too many. In my research, I found that these large backdoor hiring programs that are run by places like the UC system, the people that they're hiring, not only are they the people who are out there celebrating when Hamas massacred Israeli citizens, it's also people who are doing things like transgender studies. Some people who are actually they say that their area of specialization is pornography studies, fat studies. You have a lot of people who also go into sociology and other legitimate disciplines, philosophy, but then they take that and they distort the discipline to focus on really an activist political agenda.
Yeah.
And if you look at what they've done, that really is it. And so, I think there are absolutely too many people who are being encouraged to pursue this career path.
Yeah, I know a college student who went off to study to become a teacher, and along the way, discovered like there was an elective for like climate justice, and became really interested in climate justice. I don't even, we can talk about what that means or if it's even a real thing, but it's clearly part of the social justice movement. So, a lot of times these universities make it a requirement that you take one of these, tracks or classes that dip your toes into these social justice issues. And so kids are required to take this, and maybe you capture a few minds. Meanwhile, you maybe lose a great chemistry student or a great pre-med student along the way because they've suddenly tapped into something that they feel is virtuous or meaningful in that way. This seems to me to be a massive problem, and it seems to me to exist for reasons that are nefarious. Is there any? I mean, am I wrong about that? Is it just seems like universities and colleges have become places of divisive and radical conversations, and again, not free speech.
Yeah, I think that's largely correct. And it's interesting to look at kind of the incentives going in the other direction. If you talk to a young conservative or classical liberal or just an out-of-the-box thinker and ask if they've just gotten out of college and ask them, have you thought about going into academia? And if you have, has anyone told you you shouldn't do it because you're not going to get a job and you're not going to be welcome? Usually, if you ask young people, that's what they're going to say. They're going to say, why would I do that? I would spend years preparing myself in a kind of a miserable environment where, especially in graduate school, a lot of people are hostile to dissenting viewpoints, which gets to that issue of free speech. But then they'll say, like, even after that, there might not be a job for someone like me. And that's a part of this sort of systemic issue that kind of colors everything, because you bring up these required courses in programs like teacher education, one reason that those required courses exist is because the kind of slate of talent that universities have veers in that direction. You've got a lot of you've got a lot of professors who have specialized in environmental studies, even if that's not their main discipline, but they've just happened to add that on because it's what's trendy and it kind of fits this agenda that's been well funded. And suddenly, they have to teach classes, and they can they will often argue that this is a necessary subject for something as unrelated to that topic as teacher education or medical education. Medical education, everyone is surprised when I talk about this, but there are med schools around the country that have huge kind of social justice tracks and a lot of social justice requirements that are honestly like a big burden and get in the way of what has to be an incredibly rigorous education. And once you create this critical mass of faculty, and it's not like every professor is like this, but once you create sort of a critical mass, even if it's just 10 or 20% of faculty who have this agenda, then they can start to transform the university using all of these different mechanisms, using course requirements, using entrance requirements where you have to make these outlandish statements. And so the problem kind of builds on itself, and it is a serious issue for anyone who's trying to get in there and actually create some real reform.
Well, and you find that it's a serious issue as well for these university presidents that then are, they're cowing to these groups because these groups are so fiercely vocal. And, it sounds so innocuous. Oh, climate justice, social justice, racial justice, all these, they sound very nice, but they're not really that nice. They're very divisive. They're very often very radical, very militant in some cases. Gender ideology I've seen it become quite militant at places. And then you've got, the Claudine Gays of the world who have to step down at Harvard because she cannot say that, from the river to the sea is anti-Semitic. She can't say it for fear of losing, I don't know if it's her street cred at Harvard, losing whatever it is. But so that critical mass then just kind of keeps moving upward, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, there's an interesting development right now where nationally what we've seen is the Trump administration take just these enormous steps to push back at universities. These are high risk, hyper adversarial, a lot of people describe them as attacks. And I think that's frankly, a decent word to describe what's going on. And what we see is that a lot of university leaders are circling the wagons. What they're doing,
Yeah.
You have these pundits like Larry Summers, who used to be the president of Harvard, and now he's this big voice in the kind of the Democratic coalition, writing op-eds saying now is the time to fight back. Harvard has to fight back. But it's interesting. A lot of them, when they say it's time to fight back, they also make these concessions. These actually quite strong concessions, saying, but we all know there are huge problems with the universities. We all know. Summers even said that we have to fight back, but reform is so important that we need to have reform that doesn't follow the normal procedures where we ask faculty members how to reform, which is actually a huge step in higher education. That's really crossing some lines. He's essentially saying that he agrees with the critique. And I think a lot of university leaders actually see that, yes, this is a huge problem. This group, this constituency that wants to change what higher education means, it's actually something that a lot of ostensibly progressive higher education leaders disagree with, and they are. I think the time is right for a lot of them to take big steps to say enough is enough. We're gonna stop this in various ways. And once they get to that point, there are tools in the toolbox that they can use to steer the ship in the right direction.
Like what? What's a couple of examples?
So, I think that there's a lack of ideological and viewpoint diversity on campus. I would say that that's the main issue. And I think that the very first thing that university leaders should do is actually, first of all, acknowledge that as a goal. And that, can make a pretty big difference in and of itself, because that becomes something that other people within a university can point to when they're trying to win these small battles that actually steer the university in one direction or another. So make that a goal. And then I think what they can do is another thing they can do is announce that they are not only places that welcome dissenting viewpoints, that welcome conservatives, but also take steps to hire professors who have not necessarily who are conservatives, because you don't want to get in a situation where you are engaging in a kind of affirmative action for conservatives. That opens the door for kind of weak scholarship in the other direction. What you want to actually do is say, hey, because we've placed so much emphasis on these social justice disciplines, we actually have English departments that don't teach Shakespeare, and American history departments that don't teach, the Federalist Papers. And a lot of universities are in that situation, and that's something that they can absolutely rectify. And university leaders will have to be a little bit pushy, because usually departments are the ones that hire. And so if a department is already captured, they're gonna be able to push back. But there are ways around that. And placing a heavy emphasis on saying, we're not going to hire in these crazy subdisciplines anymore, and we are going to hire in these, you can call them underrepresented, these disciplines that are underrepresented, these disciplines that have been neglected. I think that would actually go a long way, because again, think about the young person then who is considering whether to go into law school or into academia. For the last 10 years, academia was just a worse choice. If they're a bright young person and want to have like a good, stable job, academia is a bad choice. Right. But if you can take those steps and take steps along those lines, actually maybe those young people will say, you know what, academia is changing and there's a place for me there. And that's that kind of long-term process where you pay ample attention to the talent pipeline, but say, hey, we actually have to make sure that there's a diversity of viewpoints here. That's how you steer the ship long-term in the right direction.
Yeah. And by long-term, I feel like it's going to be a really long, slow slog, because it seems the gears are, I don't know how you throw sand into these gears, but it's got to happen. John Saylor, it's been great to talk to you. I'd love to do it again. I think what you do, your research is really important and enlightening and revelatory. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
He is John Saylor. You can read him just about anywhere. Free Press, Wall Street Journal. You just find him. Find him on X. We've shown you his Twitter handle there. X handle. It's like going from the San Diego Chargers to the LA Chargers. It's still tough for me. And as I say every single podcast, be brave, do good, and we will see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe